Moving forward, you see that we had tensions with Iran and we bombed their nuclear facility. This was back in the summer. And this all was enabled by that October 7th attack, which again, I believe Israel really wanted to happen, and so they never got involved. Hopefully these peace talks bring about some sort of agreement that can at least delay this, but I'll tell you right now, Israel's not having it. Benjamin Netanyahu is not having it, and the military officials in Israel are not having it. They want this strike to happen as soon as possible. They want that regime out.
Okay, let's go into Iran. So as you guys know, there's been quite a bit of tension between the United States and Iran. We've mobilized an enormous amount of assets into the Persian Gulf to be within striking distance of Iran. Now, it's important to note that we've had issues with Iran for several decades, okay? We have them sanctioned to hell. We're going to talk about the JCPOA here in a little bit. But just as far as like a bird's eye view of where we are now, we're in a very volatile time. And this grows amid tensions because this all started, guys, with October 7th, right? So when October 7th happened, it gave the Israelis the license to go after all of their enemies who they claim is backed by Iran, right? As you guys know, they always say Iran is the #1 funder of terrorism. They fund Hamas, they fund Hezbollah, they fund the Houthis, and all of these different groups attack Israel, right? Because they stand in solidarity with the Palestinians and their occupation of the Palestinians. So what ended up happening was after October 7th happened, to give you guys a quick summary, the Israelis went into Gaza. They dismantled Hamas, killed their leadership, assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, killed Yahya Sinwar by luck. Then they began a campaign to invade Lebanon. They went into Lebanon and did a ground assault and were able to do the ground assault while simultaneously running the pager attacks and also doing airstrikes. These airstrikes killed Hassan Nasrallah, the longtime head of Hezbollah, which was a huge blow on top of killing a bunch of higher ranking guys with the pager attack. This demoralized them. Now, Hezbollah was able to put up a pretty good fight on the ground, but they ended up having a ceasefire, right? So the Israelis withdrew, Hezbollah stopped bombing them, even though Israel's still bombing them now. And this led directly to the fall of Syria. So basically within a 2-year span, guys, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria were all destabilized. Bashar al-Assad was run out of there. Ahmed al-Shara came in. Ahmed al-Shara is friendly with the U.S. and with Israel. I have no doubt in my mind that the Israelis coordinated with Ahmed al-Shara and HTS to attack the Syrian government right after the Hezbollah ceasefire because Hezbollah was weakened and they didn't want Hezbollah to be able to rearm and restock. So they ended up doing that. And then after all of that was done, very key here, the United States was in the middle of talks with Iran for a nuclear deal, right? And in the middle of these talks, the Israelis did a sneak attack on the Israelis. They activated a bunch of operatives behind enemy lines. The operatives destroyed the air defense, jammed radars, destroyed several key locations, and then on top of that, most importantly, they killed a bunch of scientists and high-ranking generals. It was literally the Pearl Harbor for Iran. Now, miraculously, within 24 hours, Iran hit Israel back very hard and did quite a bit of damage, okay? And that retaliation from Iran has made the Israelis extremely cautious on how they want to move now, okay? So fast forward to where we are now. Benjamin Netanyahu came at the end of the year for New Year's to meet with Trump, right? Presumably, they had met to talk about the Hezbollah disarming in Lebanon. But whenever Netanyahu comes here, guys, it's really to, prepare for a war with Iran. He'll say, oh, yeah, well, Hamas peace deal and all this other stuff. But the real reason he's here is to, formulate a plan against these guys. So what ended up happening instead was the United States said, we're going to go ahead and, show some aggression here, which is what they did. They mobilized, this whole armada into the Persian Gulf. And that's kind of where we are now. And earlier today, there was an agreement made for them to start talking and having talks about their nuclear program in Turkey. Okay. Now, let's be honest. The last time they had talks about their nuclear program, the Israelis used this as an opportunity to attack them. So I don't think the Iranians trust the United States, but I think both parties are using this as a stall tactic. So, but anyway, I'll turn it to you, bro. Go ahead. You said you have an article here. You can go through it.
Yeah, so I'll read the
summary
article. Yeah, that's a great summary. And what I'll do here for you guys is I'll read this article and just to give you guys a foundation and a framing as to what's happening right now. And then from there, you'll be able to understand my explanation because I'm going to go into some of the history as to how we kind of got here in terms of tension with Iran. So here, and you're going to be able to see this too. Share. All right. Propped on my screen.
Yeah,
so
I can see it.
Here we read, all right, everything should be good. Here we read, Trump, Iran, latest U.S. president says big ships are heading to Iran right now, but talks over nuclear deal continue, like we were saying today. So this article was written today. Donald Trump has warned that, quote, big ships, end quote, are heading to Iran. Big ships but said talks on a potential nuclear deal with Tehran are ongoing. Speaking to reporters on Monday, the U.S. president said, quote, "We will see how it works out," end quote, when asked if Washington would take military action. His comments came after it was announced that envoy Steve Witkoff would meet with Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi on Friday for talks on a nuclear deal, according to a report. This guy actually tweeted and said that the talks are progressing as well. Furthermore, sources told Axios that the pair would meet in Istanbul to discuss the future of Tehran's nuclear program following repeated threats by Washington of military intervention. It would represent the first meeting with U.S. and Iranian officials since Tehran's 12-day war with Israel and the U.S. last June, which saw Washington bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, by the way, in which nothing was accomplished. Tensions are running high amid a military buildup by the U.S. Navy near Iran following a violent crackdown against anti-government demonstrations last month. Last month, Trump threatened to launch strikes against the regime over the killing of protesters, but later appeared to back down. So, how did we get here, and how are we having this large naval presence in the Persian Gulf currently? There's a few reasons why, and I bet a lot of you guys are going to be able to guess how we got here anyways, but I'll tie a nice, neat bow on it. All right, so first and foremost, protests started at the beginning of the year. So moving on from 2026, we notice a lot of tensions growing in Iran with protests against the regime for the reasons that the US media frames as bad governance, terrorism, things of that nature, which to some degree are true. There has been some incompetence of the Ayatollah regime from when their inception, really, in 1979, after the revolution, which, by the way, was caused and fueled by United States intelligence paired along with the MI6 and the Mossad. But regardless, that's neither here nor there. It's obvious that people are frustrated with the regime's incompetency, which to some degree is true. But there's a whole other element to this. The middle class in Iran, and really the low class, and most citizens for that matter, are struggling. And that's because of the economic sanctions that the United States and other world powers have placed on Iran. This was all figured out. There was a step taken to hopefully diffuse all of this in 2015 with Obama, which many of you may know, but I'm sure a lot of you may have never heard of this. It's called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Several countries were on it. I think Germany, France, so on and so forth, the EU. I can't remember all of them, but a lot of countries were on board. And to simplify it and broaden it, just so you get the bigger picture here, the point of the proposal by Obama, by the way, he has some of the worst foreign policy we've ever seen, but this was actually one of the better things that he did later on in his presidency before he left and gave it to Trump, was the deal laid out a trade-off. You halt your nuclear program in Iran and stop your enrichment of uranium. You also oblige to us conducting visits or visitation and surveilling your nuclear weaponry and making sure you're not progressing or advancing. In turn, we will lift economic sanctions off of you. Iran obliged. Through some talks, they were able to come to an agreement, and every country was happy. This seemed like this was the first step towards the impossible stability of the Middle East and hopefully bringing peace to the region between two major tensions being Israel and Iran. There's one country, of course, that was mad. That was Israel. Now, precisely why were they mad? Because a lot of people would look at this at face value and think, well, that doesn't really make much sense because they were going to stop their nukes, or they were at least going to put a halt to the program. And that's the main concern of Israel. Partially. The issue is there was no talks of anything in regards to completely diffusing their ballistic missiles program, which, if you guys don't know, they have the best missiles program in the world. And they even supplied missiles to Russia, which I believe they've been using in Ukraine. But
The drones, yeah.
the economic sanctions being lifted would allow Iran to bolster their already existing and strong proxies. These proxy networks consist of Hezbollah, which is in southern Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and then the Houthis in Yemen. And in lifting these economic sanctions, Israeli officials were worried that that would be able to embolden and empower these military groups with more military capability. And so they fought back on this hard. Benjamin Netanyahu was infuriated. Israeli officials were livid, and they knew that Obama was exiting his term anyways. And so they were just going to have to bank on the next president to get this out of office. So Trump rolls around in 2016, and obviously Trump won for many reasons. And he gave.
And this is important that you're going to say this, because this is actually what got him to win, chat. Like, we talk a lot about Trump, you know, in the upset with Hillary or whatever. And a lot of, you know, big Trump supporters will say, well, Trump always wanted to pull out the JCPOA. He always was anti-Iran. That is precisely why he got the Zionist vote. But exactly. Go ahead, keep going.
No, exactly. And I mentioned this earlier, so now I'm going to be able to tie it all together. And don't worry, I'll finish this all and put a nice, neat bow on it so you guys have a better idea of the grand scheme of things. But the donors that were getting behind Trump, of course, were whispering in his ear. And we didn't know this at the time, but this is speculative. And it's obvious that we can point to the truth now because of what's been unfolding in the last 6 months with the war in Iran, at least the shadow war that's about to become physical in a moment, that these donors were definitely instilling Trump to get rid of this plan, tarnish it completely. We don't want the JCPOA. We don't want Iran to have economic sanctions lifted. We don't want them to normalize relations with the United States, which that plan was intended to do. Now, some may argue, well, it is true the plan is kind of unfair because it allows Iran to hopefully bolster their proxies. You got to realize Iran is not going to be the country to trust the US right off of the bat. So the fact that we could get them to agree to something was a huge step in the right direction. Remember, this is the country that we had launched coups in, meddled elections in, just like several other countries. And so there's no reason for Iran to trust us, being that we're the direct military backer of Israel that's been giving them problems for decades upon decades. And so the fact that they even came to the table and said yes to this deal was a big deal, something that a lot of people don't realize, and it goes over a lot of people's heads. And so after Trump was elected, slowly but surely, he didn't do it right away.
And that's why he campaigned, by the way, guys, with pulling out of the deal. That was a big reason why he campaigned, was to get that support from the Zionist lobby.
Yes,
that's why a lot of them pulled from Hillary and they went to Trump. That was instrumental in his campaign strategy.
And that's a theme, by the way, with really rich billionaire American people. They will always shift political parties just in regards to whoever has the better favorment of Israel. In this case, it was Trump. But if somebody on the left is talking a lot better than somebody on the right in favor of Israel, then they'll absolutely go in that direction. So that's what won Trump the election. He was given.
There's a donor class in America. The bottom line is this, guys. There's a donor class in America that literally votes only on foreign policy when it comes to favoring Israel. And there's a lot of them. And they have a lot of money and they have a lot of power. They're Americans, but they only care about foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East and Israel. And there's a lot of people that are like this. And guess what? These people tend to have the biggest purse strings. But keep going, bro.
Yeah, exactly. And so little, what do you know? Moving on into, I believe it was 2018. I think if the date, my memory serves me right, it was May 5th, 2018. Donald Trump comes out to the press and he says the JCPOA is off. We are no longer sharing any sort of relationship with Iran. And matter of fact, the cherry on top, the IRGC is now a terrorist organization. Yeah. So not only did Donald Trump
thank Mike Pompeo for that one.
Yes, not only did Donald Trump put economic sanctions back on Iran, but he also said that their IRGC, their military guard corps, was a terrorist organization, which pretty much progressed into this whole escalation of tension in the region, which eventually led to us killing all of these really powerful assets that held together the axis of resistance, for lack of a better term, the factions or the military networks that kept Israel at bay, or were the last leg of support for the Arab Muslim world. Qasem Soleimani, Hassan Nasrallah, like you mentioned, and many others, these people were the leaders of the axis of resistance and kept that charge alive. And so moving forward, obviously Trump does this deal and things go exactly back to how you would imagine in Iran. The sanctions are put, and slowly but surely, the people who feel this the most are actually the civilians more so than the government. And so groceries are expensive, this whole thing, life is difficult, and that causes civil unrest. Pay attention here. This is Israel's strategy from the beginning. The reason that they don't want Iran to have a flourishing economy is because that will cause civil unrest, which will in turn make it easier for them to overthrow that regime because they'll have to work a lot less hard. So this was all a part of their plan, and it's brilliant. It was methodical. So moving forward, and I'll fast forward a lot here because a lot of this is just kind of a brush in the weeds. It's not too important, but we get to October 7th. Now, this is a huge turning point in, of course, history as we know it, but more so the state of Iran and Israel. Reason being, obviously, Hamas just paraglided Fortnite style into Israel and wreaked havoc. And by the way, I am 100% a believer that Israeli officials and Israeli intelligence had the head start or had the drop on this, but let it happen because they wanted
even the Egyptians warned them. The Egyptians' intelligence services warned the Israelis that an attack was imminent. And the reason why they did that is because the Egyptians understand that their foreign aid is contingent upon playing nice with Israel. So they didn't want none of that bullshit on their table. So they said, nope, we're not going to mess with our foreign aid. Hey, Israelis, these dudes are about to invade y'all. And they still didn't heed that order.
Exactly. And they wanted this to happen. They wanted the problem to exacerbate because they would have so much more of justification in invading Iran eventually, which is unfolding today. But October 7th happens, tension in the region is at a sky high and all this crazy stuff. But this pretty much emboldens Israel to push Trump, who is later elected because Biden was in office at the time of October 7th. And Biden still bolstered Israel and gave them a huge package, I think $12 billion, if my memory serves me correctly, on the spot, lump sum, and was helping them out. We gave them tons of military aid, and they wreaked havoc and turned Gaza into a parking lot. But moving forward, you see that we had tensions with Iran and we bombed their nuclear facility. This was back in the summer. And this all was enabled by that October 7th attack, which, again, I believe Israel really wanted to happen. And so they never got involved. And this gave them so much more justification. Now, after that strike in Iran, and by the way, there's this weird, like, I think the Epstein files were making headway at that time, and now the Epstein files are making headway again. But regardless, there is this connection to the JCPOA being the first and really one of the most important steps in stability in the Middle East, and that being tarnished by these donors allowed for this war to happen today. And that's the problem with everybody who's upset with Trump. I think something that's really important goes over their head. You got to understand this. Donald Trump is at the center of two opposing factions. You've got the America Firsters on one side pulling his arm, people like Nick, who are the leading voice for this cause, and paleo conservatives who kind of pioneered this whole movement, like Pat Buchanan, and so on. These guys don't want intervention, at least in the Middle East for that matter, and they don't want their borders open. They don't want illegals here. They want all of these policies to be fulfilled, in which Trump, by the way, campaigned on very hard and promised he would deliver. He also said no new wars. So he pandered very methodically to that crowd. But on the other side of these two parties, you've got the donors that said, hey, remember what you promised us. You better deliver, and you better take care of business in Iran. Something that's really important to remember as well. We are in the midterm season, and it's coming around the corner before you know it. We'll be at the point where I think Democrats are going to take a majority of the House and Senate. This is important to understand. I do believe, and this is speculation, I don't really have smoking gun evidence for this, but this is just kind of where the wind has been blowing. I think at this point, Trump knows he's cooked, and he looks really bad optically. I think that Marjorie Greene and others kind of paved the way for Trump to eventually probably, hopefully not, but he's going to get indicted and impeached. And I think right now Trump is at a crossroads where he can commit political by going forward and actually attacking Iran. What I think, though, is at this point, the better thing to lean on for Trump is his donors, because he's lost support from everybody else. The Epstein files make him look horrible. He's getting attacked from all directions. He's suing Trevor Noah. It's obvious that Trump has a lot of things on his plate, and this is hanging over his head. I don't think Trump is going to hesitate to attack Iran and think about the midterm repercussions, just because I think he lost regardless. At this point, if he does get impeached, if he does get indicted, at least he has his donors to rely on and take care of him. And those donors will hopefully help in keeping some of those Democrats out of the House and the Senate, so Trump can maintain power moving into 2028 and hopefully hand the gloves off or the crown off to J.D. Vance. Because if J.D. Vance doesn't get elected, that whole Trump administration is going to jail.
Yeah.
Or they're getting federally indicted, and they're going to have years of hell ahead of them. Years of hell. So I think Trump is in a really, really difficult position right now. And this stems from not being centered in your beliefs and not having a core foundational set of ideas that you stick by. And that's kind of the redundant issue that we deal with in American politics. But that's the problem with Trump, is he's being pulled in several directions right now. And he's backing away from his America First position anyways. With the whole Alex Preddy situation, he didn't double down and stand on business. When press asked him, what do you think about the situation? He went on to say that, it was unfortunate, in which it was. I absolutely agree. And it was a tragedy. And he says, oh, well, we'll investigate and we'll see. And I think in a moment like that, it would have been a lot more beneficial or important for Trump to say, listen, I believe the shooting was justified. It was an unfortunate set of circumstances and it shouldn't have happened, but you can't get involved with federal law enforcement doing their job in a really tense situation. And the fact that he didn't say something along those lines, I think, is a telltale sign that he's going to pull back ICE enforcement at some point, whether it's now or later. The protests are getting crazy in Minnesota and other major cities in the United States. And Trump is just probably going to entirely lean on his donors and his foreign policy that he stuck through with, because if there's one side that he's given more headway to, I mean, it's definitely the doning side. It's definitely the Israeli side. We have the biggest naval presence we've ever had right now in the Persian Gulf. And I think at the drop of a hat, we're going to attack. Maybe not right now, because I feel like the world is ready. And it was similar with Venezuela. We kind of built up a military presence in August, but we attacked later. It'll probably be similar here. If we don't attack now, expect it in the spring. But hopefully, and we're going to get into this now, hopefully these peace talks bring about some sort of agreement that can at least delay this. But I'll tell you right now, Israel's not having it. Benjamin Netanyahu's not having it, and the military officials in Israel are not having it. They want this strike to happen as soon as possible. They want that regime out, and they want to get it while the fire and the coal is cooking. The protests are at an all-time high right now. They're saying 30,000 some odd people died. I think that's
cap. I was told that the protests are done for the most part. That's all propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been looking at Iranian television. They're saying the protests are done at this point.
So they've diffused, and there's actually an interesting reason as to why they've diffused. These protesters on the ground have reported back to reliable geopolitical analysts who have said, I think one of the guys' name, his last name is Parsi, I can't remember, but I saw a clip of him saying this and others. They were reporting that there was something really suspicious about these protests in people destroying mosques, banks. Previously in 2009, other protests, there were people who were frustrated and have had it with the regime, but never went to these lengths. And there's this weird calculated demolition that's been happening in these previous protests, as well as the inflated numbers. We see the inconsistencies. I think it's probably more like 5,000 or 6,000, which is too many. But that's precisely why the IRGC and the regime have been brutal in shutting people down and ultimately, in some cases, unfortunately, killing them, because they know that if these protests grab any sort of momentum, it will be a wide open door for Israel and the United States to spin the same lie they've been spinning and saying, we're going to liberate the people of Iran. The same way George Bush said, we're going to liberate the people of Iraq. We're going to liberate the people of Syria. We're going to liberate the people of Libya. Look at those countries now. We're going to liberate the people of Afghanistan. Look at those countries now. It's the same thing with Iran, and that's why the regime is so cautious. They watch all their partners, and not their partners, but their neighbors in the region get destroyed by the same lie. The people are oppressed. The people are struggling, when in reality, most people in Iran are actually just protesting because of the economic issues, not because they hate the regime. There is a fraction of them that do believe that. But, you know, with the rise of this Reza Shah guy and all that, this guy's planted by CIA and Mossad for that matter. I don't think that he actually has any organic favor in the Iranian civilian population. I think that he's a plant, and they're waiting to put him in the right spot. They're not going to have him build down from the bottom, but they're just going to put him right at the top once they get rid of Ayatollah. So it's important to understand everything I just said, because this could have all been avoided if donors didn't get Trump to tarnish this plan that could have led us to peace. And I'm not saying this plan was perfect, but it was certainly a step in the right direction. So that's that.
So, no, great analysis, man. And guys, yes, that is my little brother. Make sure to support him. We come from good genes. So I do think it's important to understand also what they're going to negotiate. So the U.S. and Iran are going to meet in Turkey to start having talks. Now, this is what I think is going to happen, bro. I think we're still going to go to war, just not right now, right? Because the U.S., as usual, has a poison pill request. So this is what they want. They want zero uranium enrichment. They want limits on ballistic missile program. And they want ending support for the regional proxies. And basically, these are like the main things. And the biggest one I would say is they want restrictions on Iran's development and deployment of ballistic missiles, which could serve as delivery systems for nuclear weapons. So basically, bro, they want them to limit their strongest asset. For those that don't know, Iran has some of the best, one of the best missile programs in the world. Okay? They have intercontinental missiles, I think. They just successfully tested a Russian one not too long ago. They have hypersonic missiles. They got drones. They make a lot of their drones by themselves, right? So they're able to manufacture them for really cheap. So they have a very powerful and competent ballistic missile program. And they were able to show this ballistic missile program when they attacked Israel back in June. And not only did they attack Israel back, they Israel up, okay? So bad that Israeli media had to censor how badly they got hit. But here's the thing. How do I know that they hit them really hard? Think of it. Israel and the United States are thinking twice about attacking Iran this time, because the Iranians have said, look, if you hit us again, this isn't going to be a regular war. This is going to be a regional war, which means they're going to start blowing up oil fields. They're going to start attacking U.S. bases in the region. And the other thing, too, that I think is very important, because I've been watching Randy talk about this. And I know people are going to say, oh, he's an Iranian propagandist, whatever. That's cool. I watch everybody. I watch Fox News. I watch Randy. I watch Israeli television, etc. One thing that's true is this. The majority of Iranian ballistic missile assets are targeted at U.S. locations. Okay? So their most capable weaponry is pointed at U.S. infrastructure. So if we do attack, they can absolutely level a lot of our military installments. And not only are they going to attack us militarily, they're going to create an economic nightmare for everybody, okay? And just so you guys know, like that area, the Strait of Hormuz, something like 30% of the world's oil goes through there, okay? We're talking about overnight gas prices shooting up to like $11, right, a gallon. So Iran's game, and I talked about this yesterday with you guys, it's asymmetric warfare because they don't have the capability of actually taking on the United States militarily. So what they have to do is they have to make it hurt for not just the United States, but everyone else. And this is why Trump is thinking twice before attacking them. I'm pretty confident that they wanted to attack earlier this year and kind of coincide the attacks with the protests, but the protests were not successful as they thought. Iran shut down the internet. That killed the protests quite a bit, and then they were able to arrest a bunch of these people, right? Yeah. So for the most part, they were trying to sync up the attacks alongside the protests, but the Iranians, with the help of the Chinese, by the way, they were able to shut down the internet, and then they also shut down Starlink, right? With help from the Chinese. So that is why I think the United States is like, all right, now we got to negotiate with these guys. But here's the problem. These things that they want, limits on the ballistic missile program, no uranium enrichment, right? Basically abandoning their nuclear program altogether, and then any support for the proxies, Iran's not going to agree to any of that because the proxies are what's kept them safe for the past 20 years, right? They basically created a ring of fire around the Israelis, right? The ballistic missile program, they're not going to limit that at all because that's their only defense. You know, it's basically like, oh yeah, we're your enemy, but we want you guys to get rid of your strongest weapon against us that deters us so we can attack you. Right. And the United States has proven to not be trustworthy. So they're definitely not going to do that. And then as far as like uranium enrichment, they're never going to stop their nuclear program. And to be honest with you guys, every country has a sovereign right to have, according to international law, to run a civilian nuclear program as well as be able to defend themselves with military might. So they're not going to agree to any of this, dude. So I think if anything, this is the stall for the United States. And then for the Iranians, it's good for them too, because the more they stall, the more they can get stronger and stronger. So,
yeah, exactly. And asking them to get rid of their military assets is, again, political unaliving. I don't know if I can say the S word on YouTube. So here's the thing. You're completely right. You said most of it. What I was going to say is Iran's ballistic missile program is really, really powerful. And not only did it penetrate the Iron Dome, it actually penetrated American defense military systems in Doha, in Qatar, when they bombed these Hamas members, or at least they attempted to kill them, and they killed other people in the process, which was insane. And these military assets are what keep Iran safe. This is political science 101. That's why they're racing towards a nuke for mutually assured destruction, because the only other country in that region that has a nuke, you guessed it, is Israel, by the way, which they illegally acquired, but that's a different story. And so because Israel has this nuke, and every other country has been destroyed without going to the means of the nuke, Iran senses that if they don't get special arms really quickly and they don't gear up, they're going to be next on the list. And whether they're nuked or not, that's up for debate. But they need to acquire some sort of military presence that keeps Israel away. So for Trump to negotiate and say, you need to give up everything that keeps your regime in power is absurd. And they're never going to come to the table about that again. This is why I go back to the JCPOA.
I think they're just using this to attack us again. Not attack us. Sorry. The Iranians are looking at it like, yo, the United States is going to use these negotiations to find a weak point to attack us again. That's what they're thinking. Because literally, we attacked them while they were in the middle of negotiations. And, you know, and I've noticed this with the U.S. too. Like, they will make a deal that's like just not, they're not going to accept that, dude. They're not going to get rid of their ballistic missile program. They're not going to get rid of their uranium enrichment. And they're definitely not going to stop funding the proxies, because the proxies is what's kept them safe for so long.
They can't. They literally can't, or they'll end up like all the other countries in the region. And I'm not.
And it's the only way that they can actually fight back against the West, because they've had like a four-pronged approach. Their ballistic missile program, the proxies, having uranium, and being a nuclear threshold state. This is precisely what's kept them from being toppled. So they're not going to go and make an agreement with the United States and Turkey to get rid of that. It's just not happening. So, and the U.S. does this all the time. If you remember, the last time they were in negotiations, there was talks about their nuclear program where the Saudi Arabians and other countries in the region would have certain components of their nuclear program for oversight, right?
Yeah.
The Iranians actually were like, you know, maybe we'll agree to that. Then they changed it. Oh, no, we also want you to limit your ballistic missile program. So in other words, like, they'll say, okay, we agree to this, and then they'll go ahead and add something else in, or they'll go back and change what they want. And they've been doing this for a very long time. And even Trump admitted, yeah, you know, we tricked them, ha, ha, ha. We were doing these negotiations. He basically admitted that they were feigning diplomacy to allow the Israelis to attack them and catch them with their pants down.
Yeah, yeah. And who knows? This is speculation. I don't want to get too conspiratorial here. Who knows what Donald Trump is being told behind scenes, as well as these other guys in the United States government? I mean, Israel, I think it was 1973, the Yom Kippur War, they leveraged, or they blackmailed us with their nuclear weapon. What had happened was they were getting destroyed by the Arab world. By the way, that was being supported by the Soviets. And so the United States conservative right and these Zionists kind of found a common enemy, or at least they had parallel interests. And so when the Yom Kippur War happened, Israel was getting attacked from all sides. I believe it was the Sinai, and then it was north. Syria was attacking them from the north, and Egypt was attacking them from the south. So they were getting bombarded, and they were getting crunched in, and they were winning. And so the prime minister at the time calls up, who I believe was in office, was Nixon, and he says, if
It was
you
Golda
don't
Meir was the PM.
Meyer, yes. And he calls up Nixon and he says, if
She.
you don't help us out right now, we are going to obliterate the entire Arab world. And they blackmailed us into helping them in that war. And we were forced to give them military assets, weaponry, armor, all this good stuff. And they were able to eventually push the Arabs out and win that war. And so who knows if that's what's happening right now, where you never know if there's talks behind the scenes of nuclear weapons potentially.
No. That is what happened, Riyadh. John Karakau confirmed this. The reason why Trump bombed Iran the way that he did was because the Israelis were threatening to use nuclear weapons against Iran because they were getting kicked in the 12-day war. Because as the war was getting worse and worse, right? Because in a battle of attrition, obviously, interceptor missiles are going to be a lot harder to come by than drones and regular ballistic missiles. The Israelis were running out of interceptors. So they're like, okay, well, if the Iranians keep pummeling us like this, Tel Aviv won't exist. So they told Trump, we're going to use nuclear weapons if this war doesn't end. So that's what ended up happening, because people need to understand that in a war of attrition, the way that Israel and the Iranians were conducting warfare, it was all missiles and air defense and planes and shit like that, fighter jets. So Israelis were sending fighter jets in and dropping bombs, shooting bombs at their strategic locations, and the Iranians were shooting ballistic missiles from different positions all across the country towards Israel. That's how the warfare was done. In that type of warfare, the Iranians benefit because interceptor missiles are way more expensive and difficult to acquire than missiles that they make at home, right? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of missiles that these guys have. So at some point, you're not going to be able to sustain that level of warfare in a battle of attrition. So that warfare actually favored the Iranians. And that's why Trump had to come in and hit them and then basically end the war, because the Israelis were threatening using a nuclear bomb, which makes sense. Because I wondered to myself, like, why the did Trump bomb these guys? Like, this is very politically unfavorable. But now it makes sense. And, you know, you could kind of catch on, like, in the undertones. What did he say all the time? Oh, I saved the world. Oh, I ended the war. Oh, like, I stopped something really bad from happening.
He's so vague. He's so vague.
Yeah, you know? So, like, now we know why.
There's truth to it. And, yeah, that's crazy you say that. And that shows you that history is repeating itself.
Yeah, and Karakau is pretty, I would say he's fairly credible, former CIA guy. He admitted this in an interview. You know, he said that he heard it from, you know, people that he knows, that there was talks about using a nuclear weapon. And it makes sense because the Israelis were getting pummeled, dude. Obviously, Western media didn't report it, but they were.
How that guy's alive.
And I think that's a big reason why Trump is thinking twice before hitting them right now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Look, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when, not if. But first of all, that I don't know how that guy is alive, because he's blown the lid on many things. And I never knew if everything he said was credible, but that's insane that you say that. And that adds up. And I believe that. I believe that completely, because it makes sense.
It connected the dots for me. Because, like, I was wondering, why the did they, like, in my head, I was like, why did they end the war? Like, you know, the Iranians could have done some serious damage, but now it makes sense that the Israelis, and I don't put anything past the Israelis as far as, like, using a nuclear bomb. They don't care, bro. They're a rogue nation that will do anything they have to.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want. And the United States is never going to step in and tell them stop. They might tell them chill out, but they'll never full-fledged stop them. And so we'll see where this goes. But I do predict that at some point, and maybe these talks lead to something, like we said, but I don't foresee that these talks will get anywhere unless Trump gives the Iranians some sort of room here. Like, hey, you can keep this, but can you manage this, and so on and so forth. But if he's telling them, get rid of your missiles program.
Yeah, limit it is what they said. Limit it, which basically means, like, get rid of all the good shit.
Yeah, well, apparently he told the press verbatim, like, hey, they got to get rid of the missiles and they got to get rid of the nuclear program and they've got to get rid of their proxies. And it's like, well, then they don't have a country anymore. So that doesn't make sense. And I'm not an Iranian apologist.
Yeah. We're just being pragmatic here.
Less. I have no dog in the fight, but I'm just being very fair and charitable. If you look at this from a grand perspective, you can see how this is super unfair and how Iran is backed into a corner. And Iran, as a country, they have cultures and values that I don't agree with, but they do have the right to defend themselves. And so that's why we're found in this position.